Welcome back, Biology 104. Today we're going to be covering the feathered ones notes. So for the feathered ones, the birds belong to the class Aves. That's how you say it. Birds are the descendants of the dinosaurs. And we'll look in a moment what that looks like. There are two superorders that belong to the class Aves. The superorder Paleognathi. That will contain the flightless birds, such as the ostrich, the emu, cassowary, kiwi, and the tinamou. They are called ratites and do not have a keeled sternum. Superorder Neognathi, they will contain the modern birds such as ducks, crows, robins, owls, etc. So these birds are further divided into 27 orders, and they have a keeled sternum, although some of them are still flightless. Now, the terms Paleognathi and Neognathi, that comes from the Greek. So, Paleos means ancient, Nagthos means, or Nathos means jaw. So, Paleognathi is ancient jaw. And Neognathi is new jaw. So, new jawed birds and ancient jawed birds. And they're called that because the structure of their jaw bones and their palate is more primitive in the Paleognathi group or superorder versus the Neognathi superorder. So that's why they have those names. So for birds, you can think of birds as living dinosaurs. They're descended from the dinosaurs, and they have many, many similarities to dinosaurs. And some of the cladograms break it down like this for the common ancestry between dinosaurs and birds. They even they discovered a ancient dinosaur fossil that had feathers. And I believe they've discovered many fossils at this point that had feathers, if I remember correctly. But that would include the Velociraptor and T-Rex. They have good fossils that indicate that they had feathers. Some of them are even bird-like feathers that strongly resemble the modern bird feathers for today. For the sternum, we talk about the keeled sternum and the non-keeled or flat sternum. This is the difference between the two. So an ostrich, you'll notice in the chest where the sternum is. In this case, for the ostrich, it's flat. And the flatter it is, the less muscle attachment you can have. If you look over here for the pheasant, there is a super thick keeled sternum. See how far it sticks out, which means much more room to attach muscles. So for birds that can fly, they're going to have a keeled sternum to have the muscles, attachment points for the flight muscles. So these are the differences between the Paleognathi and the Neognathi. Again, the keeled sternum is, huge difference there. And that's going to be our modern birds, and those, it'll include some flightless, but most of the Neognathi are going to be able to fly. And the Paleognathi are going to be all the flightless birds. Think of like an ostrich or an emu. When I think of an ostrich, I always think of the Swiss Family Robinson. If you remember in that movie, they ride an ostrich, and they aren't well designed for being ridden, but they can support, you don't want to, if someone weighs more than 200 pounds, it could be very dangerous for the ostrich. But if someone's about 180 pounds, you could ride an ostrich for a few minutes, but long term, they aren't designed to be ridden. They are the world's largest birds. They're known for their speed as well. They can run up to 43 miles per hour. So you can imagine that, you get around pretty quick. They have the largest eyes of any land animal, and they actually lay the largest eggs. They do not lay the largest eggs in comparison to their own body size, though. But overall, they do lay the largest eggs. And a lot of these large flightless birds in the Paleognathi group, they have very strong kicks. So they can actually be very dangerous if they were to kick you. An emu we have here. These are Australia's giant flightless birds, and they also are very fast. They can get up to about 30 miles per hour. They have powerful legs as well. Some of their unique features: they have 2 sets of eyelids and very soft double shafted feathers that they use for cooling. They are omnivores, and they do swallow pebbles that help aid in their digestion, and they're very strong swimmers. So, very interesting animals. When I was a kid, we actually grew up next to a family that raised them, and we got to go over there. They would give us their eggs, and several times we got to eat their eggs. And to hold them, when you hold their eggs, it feels like you're holding a real, like a dinosaur egg from Jurassic Park. They're very large. Next example here is the cassowary. And for the cassowary, you see this little animation or video on the right. They have an extremely powerful kick. They have a claw, an inner toe claw, that is 5 inches long, and it's like a dagger. And when they jump up and kick, it is extremely dangerous. And you can see this person holding that little door there to protect himself. Then we have a kiwi, pronounced just like the fruit, kiwi. These animals are really interesting. These birds, they are unique nocturnal flightless birds from New Zealand that have some traits like mammals. For example, their feathers are more hair-like. They have cat-like whiskers. Their nostrils at the end of their beak provide an extremely strong sense of smell. And it allows them to hunt underground for insects and little worms and things, which is pretty cool. They lay gigantic eggs. Their eggs make up to 20% of their body weight, if you can imagine that. It's about 1/5, 1/6 the size of their bodies. And if you look here on the images to the right, you can see this one is just a model they've created to show you that relative size. And here is one that's laid their egg and how big it is. So pretty crazy how large their eggs can get. Then we have a tinamou. Something interesting about these, their males will actually raise multiple clutches, and that will be from different females. So they're unique in their nesting behavior. Then we have the modern birds, the Neognathi superorder. It's going to include eagles, parrots, penguins, ducks, geese, chickens, turkeys, owls, hawks, robins, finches, sparrows, several others. And they're going to mostly be birds with that can fly because they have keeled sternums. But some of them obviously do not fly. Birds are bipedal with 4 limbs that have been adapted for flight. They are oviparous with an amniotic egg. In some species, the offspring are altricial, which means they are helpless when they are born. And in others, the offspring will be precocial. And that means as soon as they're born, basically, they're ready to go. So we'll see both with birds. They're endotherms, so their temperature is going to be regulated metabolically internally. So they do not have to rely, like reptiles and amphibians, on their behavior to increase their body temperature. What they will rely on is eating lots of food. So they have very high metabolism, high heart rates, and they have to eat all the time. So for example, if you take a hummingbird, its heart rate at rest will be about 250 beats per minute. And when it's really active, when it's feeding, it can get up to 1,200 beats per minute, which is just incredibly fast. They have a 4-chambered heart, and their metabolism heart rate are going to be higher than our ectotherms. Skeleton is really cool. Obviously, they need to be light so they can have better flight, so they don't weigh so much and use so much energy trying to get off the ground. Their bones have air cavities in them, and that's what helps make them lighter. The vertebrae are fused, which makes the skeleton more sturdy since the bones are more hollow and weaker. The wishbone or furcula consists of fused clavicles, and that is what allows for flight. And I'll show you if it'll let me on here a little animation that kind of shows you how the muscles and tendons work. A keeled sternum is present in the birds that can fly, while a non-keeled sternum occurs in those flightless birds. So the keeled sternum is what provides that surface area for the muscle attachment. Here's the difference in a bird bone and a human bone. You see all the extra air space, all these air pockets. That's what makes them so light. So here's just a diagram of what those bones look like. So in the blue, you see the large keeled sternum. In the red, we see those fused clavicles, what they call the furcula. And then in the yellow, right, that would be the upper arm bone. So that would be the humerus. And of course, these have all been modified for flight. And then in the green, you have a coracoid. And in the purple, you have the scapula. So they've all modified their shapes to allow for flight. For aves, they're going to have their senses such as color vision and hearing going to be well developed. Smell and taste are less developed because they don't have to rely on that as much. Right? If a bird is flying and it's looking for some prey, it's not going to be smelling it and relying on smell and taste. It's going to be relying more on being able to pick out differences in color and movement with its eyes, or hearing something, particularly if it's a predator and they're on a branch or something. So the respiratory system is highly developed. That's going to ensure they always have oxygen-rich air continuously supplied to the lungs so they can continue flying. And they achieve this through these extra air sacs that are located within the thorax and the abdomen that help them continuously provide oxygen into their circulatory system, which is pretty cool. So when a bird inhales, 75% of the oxygen-rich air flows into these air sacs. And when a bird exhales, fresh oxygenated air is drawn into the lungs from the air sacs. So this is the most efficient way to breathe in all vertebrates. Birds have a voice box to produce a wide variety of sounds or songs, which is how they can actually tell species apart, mating calls, courtship displays, things like that. There are many adaptations of beaks and feet that we will look at as well. This is what those air sacs look like surrounding the lungs, if we look at that. So they're able to bring air into the air sac, so as they breathe, then that air can go into the lungs continuously, which is pretty cool. Here are some different beaks that are adapted to different types of eating, right? We think of a dip net, like in Finding Nemo, it comes up and picks the fish up. Or you might have this large beak, which is good for getting into fruits. Smaller beaks with the top superior portion that kind of hangs over the inferior part of the beak, and that's going to help them really crack into nuts and break them apart and have some articulation. So they're all, specific to certain things. Think of a hummingbird, the long skinny beak. It's great for nectar. It gets right in there, like in honeysuckle, to get some nectar at the bottom. And then they're going to have different kinds of claws and feet and toes, and all of those are going to be for different things. Maybe they need to be hanging onto a tree, getting insects. Or maybe they're going to be walking on the ground more. Maybe they're going to be swimming in the water. Whatever it is, their feet are going to be adapted to that niche that they're in. So for feathers, that would be the most distinguishing characteristic for birds. It's the presence of feathers. Loss and replacement of feathers is called molting. The specific arrangement and appearance of the feathers is called plumage. Tail and flight, feathers are lost in pairs to help them maintain their balance as they molt, which is pretty cool. So here's some feather structures and their descriptions. I'll just read through these. You have a vane, which is the flat surface on either side of the feather. The shaft, which is above the skin, that the vane, the shaft above the skin that the vane is attached to. You have the quill, which is the base extending beneath the skin. Then you have barbs and barbules, which are filaments extending from the shaft, and the barbs consist of smaller barbules. I'll show you all an image of that. Then you have hooklets, so tiny microscopic structures located on the barbules that connect the barbules together like a zipper, which is pretty neat. So if you zoom in, you have these barbs coming off, and then the barbules coming off of the barbs. And that's how it makes this kind of layer to the feather. Some feather types. There are contour feathers. So this would be your usual feathers that are good for flying. Then you have tail feathers. Those are more balanced evenly on the left and right. And that is a type of contour feather. Then you have a flight feather, which is unbalanced on the left and right, helps them cut through the air with less drag. It's a type of contour. Down feathers, which are going to be soft feathers that help to insulate a bird. Filiplumes, simple hair-like feathers that provide sensory feedback. Then you have bristles, sensory and protective feathers near the mouth that are only present on some birds. And then semi-plume, which are going to be for insulation and helps water. Birds that swim on the water helps them flow better. And there's what those different feathers look like. So large variety within the feather types. And this would be the arrangement of feathers on a wing. I won't go through all of these, but you can see kind of why they have the names that they have as they kind of flare out from primary to secondaries. And then scapulars would be over the scapula. So again, there's a huge variety within these birds that we see in their beaks and their feathers, in their feet, in their size of their eggs, mating calls, behavioral patterns. And to get speciation within birds, it can be as simple as, geographically isolated and their beak size changes just enough that their bird songs are different. And then when they're reintroduced back to the birds they came from, they don't recognize each other anymore. And then you have two new species. So speciation can happen relatively quickly with birds, if you differentiate that based on if they will reproduce with each other. Here's a little animation. We'll see if it'll play.
Hundreds of The centerpieces of this system are the flight muscles. Pectoralis major, and beneath it, supracoracoideus. Together, they form the engines of avian flight.
So you can see how, if I can go back a second, that keeled sternum, all that extra room for muscle attachment, is what gives them all the leverage for their muscles. And you'll see how this muscle and its tendon wraps over the furcula. And what that provides is when the muscle contracts and relaxes, it only has to go in one direction and it naturally rebounds. So it makes it much less energy required to fly, which is pretty cool. So if you want to see that video, it's attached in the PowerPoint if you want to go back and watch it. But that is our Birds Notes PowerPoint.